Olá, bem-vindos à mesa número 6, na pior em Nova York e Edimburgo. Eu sei que todo mundo espera que a gente fale bastante de drogas nessa mesa, mas eu acho que isso seria um pouco de reducionismo. A gente vai falar de drogas em algum momento, é claro, mas a gente está na presença de dois autores que trabalham com uma grande amplitude temática e emocional, e que são, acima de tudo, muito atentos à questão da vulnerabilidade humana, né, em todas as formas que ela pode assumir. Então, a gente vai falar disso, das possibilidades da literatura, né, de humor, de culpa, e também um pouquinho de drogas, porque, enfim, é o que se espera. Vou ler aqui um pouco... Vou ler aqui. O Irvine Welsh é autor de Trainspotting, que se tornou um marco da contracultura na literatura e no cinema ao retratar o submundo de sua cidade natal a partir da vida de jovens viciados às voltas com abusos de drogas, crises de abstinência e recaídas. No Brasil, seus contos e romances são publicados pela editora Rocco. Tornou, As Revelações Picantes dos Grandes Chefs, Se Você Gostou da Escola, Vai Adorar Trabalhar, Crime, Requentando Repolhos e Skag Boys. Na ponta temos Bill Clegg, que é um dos mais destacados agentes literários de Nova York. Estreou como autor em 2010, com o livro de memórias Retratos de um Viciado Quando Jovem, no qual narra os anos de mergulho em sua dependência de crack. A reabilitação, que se deu durante 3 meses, foi narrada em 90 dias, Diário de uma Recuperação. Os dois são da Companhia das Letras. Já reconhecido como prosador de talento, lançou-se na ficção com Você Já Teve uma Família?, que também é da Companhia das Letras, o primeiro romance sobre uma mulher que perde a família em um incêndio. Bem, quase todas as minhas mesas prediletas da Flip, elas começam com leituras, que eu acho que é uma maneira legal de aproximar, de criar um clima, assim, de aproximar quem não conhece a obra dos autores do que eles escrevem. Então, a gente vai começar por aí. E daí, também, se vocês quiserem falar um pouco, dar um contexto, dar um background do trecho que vocês vão ler, é ótimo. Então, por favor, Irvine.
Yeah, there's no real context to... Oh, there is. I'm actually doing chapter 3. I thought I was doing chapter 1. This chapter is narrated by a character called Lucy Brennan, who's a fitness instructor. And she's become a hero because she's disarmed this gunman on this causeway in Miami. And her heroic deed has been witnessed by another woman called Lena Sorensen, who's an artist, who's an overweight artist. And this is Lucy basically kind of just reflecting on everything that's happened to her. So, here we go. Couldn't sleep. Didn't even try. As the sun rises, I'm stretching out in Flamingo Park, preparing for my early morning run. I'm not going to let miles, a motor vehicle accident, some asshole shooting off a gun, or even the entire Miami-Dade Police Department fuck with my routine. So I'm pushing down 11th Street towards Ocean at an easy 7.5-ish miles per hour. Road-working Latinos hoist fallen palms back upright, supporting them with wooden stays. The rehabilitated trees gratefully swish and wave in the cool breeze. When I first came down here, a resentful high school sophomore, I recall my mom's boyfriend, Lieb, explaining to me that the palm roots were shallower than those of most trees, so they were easily blown over in hurricanes and storms. They didn't suffer that much trauma and could survive this. I was missing Boston and made some bratty comment about how in Miami, even the trees have superficial roots. But I didn't pay much attention to them at the time. My disdain was focused on the red patch on Lieb's balding dome. Of course, a couple of months later, when it turned out to be an aggressive skin cancer, which she thankfully got removed. I felt kind of bad for my previous disgust. As I hit Washington, I slowed down to a 4 miles an hour jog for a couple of blocks, opting to take in the mess of tattoo parlors, sports bars, nightclubs, and stores selling tacky beachwear. Even this early, some drunk groups are still about, looking into closed store windows for future purchases. Shrill girls check out thongs emblazoned with slogans like, "Don't be a pussy, eat one," while snickering guys earmark tees with the silhouette of naked pole dancers and the proclamation, "I support single mums." From plush cocktail lounge to tacky sports pub to seedy dive bar, you can find all levels and so be. Only one thing holds it together: a love of pure, unadulterated sleaze. Convertibles cruise past, their blaring sound systems often as expensive as a car, rolling down market as obviously nobody on Ocean or Collins is paying attention, no doubt lost in their own narcissistic concerns. A trio of shivering junkies share a cigarette in one doorway. A little further down, two people of indeterminate sex lie asleep under a pile of unwashed laundry. Enough of this BS. I turn towards Collins and Ocean, the sand and the sea, skipping past a stumbling drunk who mutters something unintelligible. Without this kickstart to the day, I would be lost. A day without a morning run is a day you fumble through rather than one you attack. I rack it up a few notches to around 10 miles an hour, running down the beachside tarmac path as far as South Point, picking up more speed on the way back. I'm flying past them all now, my sneakers slapping the ground in light rhythm, my breathing controlled and even. This is how it feels when you know you are with the gods. The rest of them, the shambling mortals, are just losers, so slow, so limited. Tailing off to what feels around an even 7.5 miles an hour, I cross over Ocean, oblivious to the sleepwalking cars, and head down 9th before turning on to Lenox. Up ahead, I see a crowd of people in the street outside my condo. Unlike the others in the area, our building facade is Art Deco, but is unique in being painted lavender and pistachio with an abstract geometric design of ocean liner stripes and portholes. But why are the guys with cameras shooting pictures outside the property? I worry there's a fire or something, and then I get closer and I realize with mounting panic, this shit is for me. I quickly spin off down 9th Street, heading for the back entrance to my home, but one asshole has clocked me and he shouts, "Lucy, one moment, please!" A stampede of paparazzi, a pack of red-faced, morbidly obese squeezers and skinny vampire alcoholics blinking in the sun, suddenly give an unlikely pursuit. I'm not letting up though, ripping my keys out and opening the cage metal door to the back stairs. I slip in, slam it shut, just as the snapping pack crush up against each other on the mesh. I'm climbing the staircase, ignoring their cacophony. Yeah.
Bill, por favor.
That's a tough act to follow. So I won't. So the context here is before the book begins, a house blows up from a gas leak and 4 people die. One of the people who dies in that house explosion is a young man who is black and has served time in prison. And this is in a very small town that is mostly white and affluent, and there's no evidence to prove this, but he's blamed. And his mother is his only relative, and she is sitting in a diner, and she overhears local women gossiping about this and accusing him of being responsible for this explosion and for all these deaths. And so she stands up and announces herself and storms out of this coffee shop and starts walking down the sidewalk home. And so this is where we meet her. Each day, even in the rain, she walks. Her car, an old light blue Chevy Lumina, parked behind the apartment building where she lives, hasn't been driven in over a month. She only ever used it for cleaning jobs, and if she needed to go somewhere in town, she always saved gas by walking. The grocery store and the coffee shop are her only destinations now, and she goes to both on foot. She walks past St. David's, where Luke's funeral was held, the same church her mother took her to on Christmas Eves and Easter Sundays when she was growing up. Whether God is or isn't, we cover the base, is what she'd say, and for that reason insisted she and Earl get married there too. Luke's funeral was the first time Lydia had stepped foot in the place since her wedding day, and it surprised her that nothing had changed in over 30 years. The same dark wood, the same gloomy stained glass. God isn't, she whispered that day to herself and to her dead mother. And if he was, Lydia knew he'd long ago looked beyond her. She walks past the small house she grew up in next to the firehouse, the two-family Victorian where she lived when she was married briefly, the apartment above Bart Pitcher's garage where her mother lived the last 15 years of her life, the apartment 3 streets away behind the liquor store where she went to live after her divorce was final and where she raised Luke. She should have left this town by now, she thinks, ducking under a low-hanging branch. There is no one here, but there is no one anywhere. For a while there was, when Luke was young and it was just the two of them. But as he grew older, he found swimming and friends and started to occupy a world apart from her, even though they lived under the same roof. Then, much later, after prison and years of avoiding her, he came back, and only because June made him. That began a brief time, so anomalous and happy she remembers it now as if she'd made it up. Like a fable in which some wretch is given a glimpse of paradise only to have it snatched away. She is that wretch. Luke letting her back in his life, and with him June, so much more than she had expected, and now both of them, in a puff of black smoke, gone. She kicks at a pile of leaves that have been raked and left uncollected on the sidewalk and considers the thousands of times she's walked here. As a little kid, a teenager, a mother, and now. She can't imagine anyone walking these sidewalks as many times as she has. My feet are famous to these sidewalks, she thinks, and the idea almost amuses her, its novelty breaking for a split second the panic that drove her from the coffee shop. She holds her breath as she walks past the cemetery, perhaps the only childhood superstition she still holds on to. She clears the street corner that marks the end of the property and exhales, imagining all the thwarted ghosts, including her parents, who wait inside the cemetery gates for her to join them. Luke is buried in the small cemetery behind St. John's Church, where Lolly Reed was supposed to be married. It's across the road from where June's house had been and seemed to Lydia the obvious place. In addition to Luke's plot, she bought 2 more, one for her, and though she never had the chance to tell her, one for June. As she crosses the street and rejoins the sidewalk, she has a sharp sense that someone is behind her. She thinks she hears footsteps, but when she stops and turns around, no one is there. Just a teenager riding his bike on the street, heading in the opposite direction. The ghosts are out today, Lydia remembers her mother saying on dark winter days like this. She starts walking again, faster now, and remembers how Luke once called her a ghost. He didn't say it kindly, and it was before he began to forgive her, before June. He was standing in the section of the grocery store where the ice cream and frozen pizzas are displayed in clear-doored freezers. She had seen him enter the store and followed him in, kept a distance as she watched him move from aisle to aisle and fill his cart. He'd been out of prison for an entire summer, and she'd still not spoken to him, even though she'd left him many unanswered notes and phone messages. His shirt was too small, and it rode up his back as he bent to lift a bag of ice. She could see the thick cord of his spine and the muscles on either side wriggling like snakes under his dark skin. How on earth could I have created something so beautiful, she thought. When he saw her, he stood still and stared for several seconds, and then began to turn away. But before he did, he stopped abruptly and spat, "Go away, ghost." She crosses the village green toward the small apartment building where she has lived on the first floor for more than 6 years. She climbs the rickety porch steps and notices she left a lamp on in the living room. She figures a moth of some kind must be banging against the bulb, because the light dances and casts small, fast shadows across the couch, the chair, the wall. She pauses at the door and lets herself see for a moment what she imagines most people come home to: lit rooms, voices, someone waiting. It is raining now. Somewhere on Upper Main Street, a metal mailbox slams shut. She thinks she hears footsteps again, this time rushing away, but soon there is only the sound of raindrops tapping the fallen leaves, the parked cars, the gutters. She closes her eyes and listens. No one calls her name. There are no more footsteps behind her, but still she turns around before unlocking the door and stepping inside. She takes a long, late-day look at the town where she has lived her whole life, where there are no friends, no family, but where her feet are famous to the sidewalks.
Bem, antes de começar, eu queria dizer que a gente vai intercalar as minhas perguntas com perguntas do público. Então, se vocês já quiserem perguntar alguma coisa para algum dos dois, já podem ir mandando para o pessoal da organização, que eles vão me passando e a gente organiza. Queria começar com uma pergunta para o Bill. Uma memória, ela é sempre uma reconstrução. Sempre que a gente se lembra de alguma coisa, a gente está editando aquilo, né? Isso vale tanto para as nossas lembranças quanto para a literatura, para o memorialismo. Né? Ao escrever um livro de memórias, por mais sincero que o autor seja, ele sempre está no controle do que ele vai mostrar ou do que ele vai esconder. Né? Inclusive, pode escolher quando vai ser sincero ou não. Né? E, além disso, ele parte de uma cronologia já existente, né? De um enredo prévio. Então, é mais fácil planejar o caminho. Na ficção, isso é um pouco mais complicado, porque tem a possibilidade do autor acabar se mostrando de uma maneira inconsciente, assim, se mostrando muito vulnerável, mostrando muito de si, sem ter essa intenção. E a cronologia e o enredo também não existem de antemão, então é uma coisa que vai se construindo no processo. Né? Por isso que publicar, às vezes, é visto como uma vaidade, que também é, mas também é sempre um ato de coragem, né? Seja ficção ou não ficção. Levando isso em conta, assim, para você, qual foi a diferença principal entre escrever memórias, né, os seus 2 primeiros livros, e passar a escrever ficção? Foi uma transição proposital, uma decisão consciente? Agora eu vou escrever um romance? Ou foi uma coisa que foi acontecendo, que pegou você de surpresa?
There's a lot to respond to that. The truth is, the beginning of the novel began inadvertently while I was writing my first memoir. Mainly because when I was writing the memoir, I thought that I would have to remember a lot about the town that I grew up in. I grew up in this very small town in Connecticut, about 1,500 people. And I left that town when I went to college, and my parents got divorced and sold our house. And so I hadn't been there in a long, long time. And when I was writing the memoir, when I was 34, I hadn't been there really since I was 19 years old. And so I opened up a file on my computer, and I just wrote down everything that I could remember about the town. All the feuds and the scandals, the gossip, and, just the names even. And the more I remembered, the more I remembered, the more I remembered. And it turns out that I didn't need any of that for the memoir, because the memoir turned out to be just this very focused period of time during the end of my drug use. And so after I had written the memoir and then written another one, I sort of went back to that file and just kind of played around with it, and just became interested in the town. I even went back to the town a few times, and the part of the town that I had remembered during that process was just how much tension there was. It's a town that has a small, fierce, working poor population that's been there for many generations. Many of the families have been there for 200 years. And then also these very wealthy families who come up on the weekends and in the summers. It's 2 hours north of New York. And so it was that tension that I got really interested in, and just the friction in class. And so when I started playing around with that and thinking maybe there was something there, I originally thought it was just going to be about the class sort of tensions in the town, and that's where the novel came from. But it was a very slow, intermittent, like, you know, I would go back to that file between those memoirs and after, and all in all, it took, you know, over 7 years to write the book. So, but for most of those years, I didn't think I was writing a novel. I thought I was just playing around in this particular file.
E como agente literário, assim, como para você é estar do outro lado, assim, do balcão, digamos assim? Como a experiência de escrever ficção deixou você mais paciente com teus autores ou mais severo com eles? Isso não é tão difícil assim.
No, definitely don't say that. It's. I think I have just an extra sensitivity to the vulnerability of having a book out in the world. You know, it's something that you're with by yourself for so long, and then you have a bunch of people talking about it, hopefully, and even if they are, half of the time it's, you know, it doesn't. Oftentimes you don't recognize the thing that you wrote in what they've said, even if it's positive. So. There's such it's for me the publication period is awful. It's just a certain level of agony that I can't even begin to name. And so when my writers have their books come out in the world and they go crazy, I have a new compassion for that. So.
Okay. Irvine, você já pensou em escrever memórias ou a ficção dá conta?
Yeah, I think the first book kind of, I suppose, you know, it kind of started off as a memoir to an extent. You know, it was like, I found that, you know, that one of the things I could do in that period of my life, but the only thing I could do was compulsively kind of record things and write things down. But I realized that it was very much an unreliable memoir. You know, I didn't trust myself. His memoir, because I found that you know, that I'd put myself in very kind of self-aggrandizing sort of, you know, in a very self-aggrandizing position in some of the kind of stories and scenarios, and I just kind of I felt a bit awkward doing it. And I kind of, you know, what it was that I didn't realize that I actually was a fiction writer. I had this tremendous drive to not want to be kind of limited by the truth in a way. I wanted to kind of to get beyond that by, you know, to build fabrications on top of that, you know, and it kind of it made more sense to me to kind of just to accept that and kind of free myself from that kind of burden of trying to do a sort of memoir which I wouldn't have had any confidence in its reliability myself. So it just kind of naturally evolved into fiction, really, because I'd kind of because I've been really, I think, you know, I'd tried to do music for years and years, and I'd been really frustrated that I hadn't found the, you know, my kind of sense of myself creatively in that, that was able to I was able to hit on something, and it was like a revelation to me, really, kind of writing that book, that I was actually a fiction writer, and this is really what, you know, I stumbled on something that I was meant to do. So it was a great kind of, it was a great feeling of release for me. You know, I could get all these kind of, all these things that accumulated, all these stories, and, you know, all these creative urges that I had. They could go out, and I wouldn't need to kind of mess around with a lot of other guys kind of playing stuff and, you know, doing stuff. I could just sit down myself and kind of get on with it at my own pace.
Okay. Irvine, você é um mestre assim do uso de primeira pessoa, dos narradores em primeira pessoa. Muitos autores que tentam escrever em múltiplos pontos de vista usando primeira pessoa, às vezes caem numa armadilha de trocar o discurso de um narrador para outro, mas a forma fica parecida, meio que a gente enxerga o autor por trás daquilo. Na minha opinião, você consegue transcender isso com o uso de linguagem mesmo, de uma linguagem mais oralizada, e que sempre foi uma característica sua, né, da linguagem usando o escocês coloquial, o inglês escocês coloquial, um pouco de Scots. Como que surgiu como é que você começou a usar isso nos seus livros? Assim, quando, por exemplo, o Trainspotting, quando você começou, era em inglês padrão no começo? Como que você percebeu que a chave para fazer o personagem sair do papel e realmente ganhar vida era ser mais próximo da forma literal, assim, de falar?
Yeah, I mean, the initial drafts were kind of standard English, and it wasn't working out. It kind of, they weren't flying for me, the characters weren't operating, and the culture all this was taking place within wasn't coming to life either. And it seemed very pretentious to make people speak in a way that they didn't speak. It seemed, using standard English seemed to be very pretentious. And I think that was one thing. I was trying to get to that place where I could bring that out. I could make that kind of... I wanted people to feel that they were actually in the room with the characters, and they could feel their breasts on the back of their neck and all that, and have that real, kind of almost that visceral feel to it. But I was also, at the time, I was... the whole kind of acid house thing in Britain had kicked off, and I was DJing in clubs, and I was kind of really into house music, and I was into this kind of thing that I wanted to get into writing that feel that I had when I was in a club DJing, maybe on an ecstasy pill, and kind of, that I wanted to get a kind of a 4/4 beat to it. And I wanted to get kind of effects kind of on the top of it, So I wanted to get like, I felt that the Celtic kind of, the language that I was using is, because it's a spoken language, it has a beat to it, it has a sort of performative kind of beat to it. And I didn't do so much with Trainspotting in the first book, but the other books I started to do a lot of typographical experiments and, and with text and all that, and fonts and sort of, and they would be the kind of the effects on top of the beat, but the kind of vernacular and the sort of the sort of the oral kind of tradition in a way was me trying to establish a beat. I mean, I think the English language is a fantastic language, but it's very much an imperialistic kind of controlling kind of weights and measures type of. This is sort of pounds, shillings, and pence. This is everything's in its proper place, sort of kind of language. And I wanted something a little bit funkier, basically, that would just bang, bang, bang. And it would propel the kind of sense of the energy of the characters and the scenarios that they were finding themselves in. So that was like, and it was just trial and error, basically, to find that.
O escritor mexicano-espanhol Max Albe, ele escreveu uma vez que nós somos do lugar onde cursamos o ensino médio, querendo dizer, de certo modo, de que esse período de formação da nossa vida é meio que um filtro pelo qual passam todas as nossas memórias e da onde nasce a ficção. Vocês dois são autores que os livros de vocês têm um senso de lugar muito forte. Assim. Edimburgo é muito viva nos livros do Irvine Welsh, e eu suspeitava, e agora eu sei, que o Clegg poderia ter crescido numa cidade pequena, como a do romance dele. Né? Então, eu queria saber assim, se vocês acham realmente que a gente talvez nunca se livre do lugar onde a gente cresceu, e a nossa ficção nasce disso, nasce desse filtro dos anos de formação?
I think that's true. I mean, it's almost discouraging to realize how much that period of time, especially adolescence, still like hovers. It's so present. It was useful in writing the novel in a way. But I ended up moving to New York, and I've lived in New York for 25 years. But where I grew up, there's a character in the book who is a landscaper and pulls weeds and plants flowers and shrubs for wealthy New Yorkers. I did that in high school and college, and these people who would come up to these beautiful houses were like rock stars to us. And it was before the internet, so we didn't know what their lives were like. They just came in these nice cars, and then they would like whisk away on Sunday night or Monday morning. And all we could do was sort of imagine into these lives. And, we were just stuck in this small town. And so now that I've lived in New York for 25 years, and recently I have a house in the country that's about 45 minutes away from where I grew up, and everybody that I interact with at the house, there's a part of me that wants to say, look, I'm I'm you, like I did this, and which of course really goes over well, you can imagine, but it's like, but I still, like, to this day, I'm constantly going back and remembering, all those, I run into some of those families that I worked for in New York, and then I'm like that 16-year-old talking to them. I ran into one and I was like, "Hi, Mr. Cuneo, how are you?" And I just felt like such a little twerp. But all of that stays, all of that, like, insecurity, that class insecurity, all of that, strife from family. I think, we keep on working it out in different ways, like later and later in life. I'm 45, I'll be 46 in the fall, and it sort of shocks me that stuff still kind of hangs on.
Irvine, e para você, como funciona isso?
Yeah, I think you kind of, the place that you grow up in does kind of form it does kind of form you as a writer, I think, in so many ways. I mean, I kind of find that when I'm writing something that doesn't see, even if it's not in Edinburgh. I mean, I remember I was writing this story about these two tribes in Africa. That I was doing this thing with UNICEF, and I was out in Sudan, and we were kind of we were with the guerrillas in southern Sudan before it became independent, and there was two factions there, and we were kind of going between one faction and the other, and I thought that this was the entire, the story was just a self-contained thing about me being there and writing about that, and actually I realised what I was really writing about, the dynamics of it, the kind of the furniture, that was just the furniture of it, but the real kind of dynamics of it came from a kind of conflict between two street gangs when I was growing up, basically, and it was like, and it was like kind of that was the actual bedrock of the whole story, and the rest, the embellishments were just. So I think it comes out in so many different ways, and I think there's no real escape for it, but it is it's kind of the base, really, and the structure and the superstructure and all that kind of go on top of it. You can write about different places, but I think that forms your kind of worldview, in a sense, as a writer.
Bem, acho que está na hora de a gente falar um pouquinho de drogas. Desde, pelo menos, o século XIX, assim, os livros com relatos de dependência, e desde, sei lá, o Thomas de Quincey com memórias confissões de um comedor de ópio, tem esse fascínio dos leitores por esse tipo de relato, de dependência química, de degradação decorrente disso, né? São inúmeros exemplos. Eu penso muito sobre isso, eu queria saber para vocês de onde vocês acham que vem essa forma específica de voyeurismo, assim. Será que é uma espécie de mecanismo de defesa das pessoas, como estivessem assistindo a um acidente de carro e pensando, não, pelo menos não sou eu ali? Não sei se... De onde vocês acham que vem esse instinto essa curiosidade quase mórbida por esse tipo de relato, seja em ficção ou não ficção?
I think the truth is that drugs and alcohol affect everyone. And, whether or not you're an addict or an alcoholic yourself, you tend to know somebody, whether it's a family member, a spouse, or a child. And so I don't think it's so much voyeuristic as it is, I think, on the part of people who struggle with addiction and alcoholism. It's an issue of identification, and as well for, most of the letters that I get or emails are from family members, like, spouses who read the book to try and understand what that experience is like. So, and it's the extremity of human experience in some ways. It's like, and a lot of people, I think, live with in my case, I walked out of my life, like, quite literally, and disappeared into hotels for several months doing drugs, and only that. And, you know, probably at a lot of points in most people's lives who are not alcoholics or addicts, they like think about chucking it all and walking out the door and like doing drugs in a hotel room. And, you know, it was, so there's a part of that that's kind of like the extremity of that, like that impulse that we all have to kind of like walk away from frustrating times. So, but in my experience, it's most of the people who I hear from or talk to about it, there's some reason, there's some unanswered question, there's somebody in their life who they either don't understand or it's something in their own life that they're puzzling through. So it feels less voyeuristic in that way.
Irvine, para vocês.
Yeah, I mean, you know, not really much to add to what Bill said there, but I've tried to, you know, I think that I tried to work out that, I mean, I think kind of, in, you know, the way we live as a society and the ubiquity of drugs and the way that kind of drugs are used by, you know, sort of people now, it's like, to me, that they're always, it's more of a symptomatic thing. It's an indication that something else is happening. And, I mean, for example, like, you know, Trainspotting, you know, I mean, I you know, it's difficult to understand why this book still resonates. And to me, it's not so much about drugs. It's about a transition from one type of society to another, you know. And the transition is basically, we're transitioning into a world of paid work to a world where we won't have paid work anymore. And it started off with like the industrial working classes with deindustrialization, and then now it's moved into, you know, the reason that it still resonates as a book is because a lot of middle class professions now, like journalism and all that, there is no, you know, there's not that scope for paid work now. So I think it's about transition, and drugs are always a symptomatic thing, because in the absence of work or the absence of anything else, or community or whatever, drugs will fill the gap, because it's an easy way to fill that kind of sort of gap. And it's, so drugs to me, it's like, whenever there's a transition in society, there's always an epidemic of some kind, and drugs are that kind of epidemic. So they're always symptomatic, and that doesn't kind of. I mean, you know, anybody can mess up and wreck their lives on drugs, but if you look at it from a more kind of societal rather than a kind of individual kind of pathology kind of point of view, you see that they for large kind of sections of the population now, they're basically the only way that you can have not just a kind of an economy, an underground economy, a black economy, but they also replace work, and the only way you can have a kind of compelling drama, which I think you need when you're younger. Youth need a compelling drama, so they get on the streets now, basically, with the whole kind of sort of, you know, with the kind of sort of drug thing kind of thrown into it, and it becomes a way of an assertion of self and territory and community. In a way that work used to be, and isn't now. So I always think that, you know, drugs are that symptomatic thing rather than the kind of, they're an indicator of change rather than the actual kind of change itself.
Irvine, seus livros eles usam bastante o humor, assim, que o humor é uma característica que às vezes a literatura que tem humor, às vezes ela é vista como uma literatura menor, assim, tem um certo preconceito contra tanto o humor negro quanto a tragicomédia, às vezes é visto como uma coisa que não é séria, até a própria palavra diz, né? Não seria uma literatura séria. Os seus livros, eles são, apesar de terem momentos de muita melancolia e tem violência, mas tem muito humor e às vezes até a gente ri de coisas que parece errado rir. Então, eu queria saber, assim, para você, qual é você acha realmente que uma literatura que não usa humor, ela não usa todas as suas possibilidades?
I think it depends why you're using humor. I mean, I use humor not really to make people laugh or or because something's funny, but I use it really mainly as a tension reduction mechanism so that I can make people engage with darker material than they would normally feel comfortable behaving with. So to me, it's a way of giving people some kind of space, you know, and also giving yourself some space as a writer to go a bit deeper and to go a bit kind of more out there. And you know, humor is about it's about tension reduction. You know, we laugh because, you know, if you see people sitting in a cinema and there's a very dark kind of scene, they'll laugh not because they find it funny, but they'll laugh to give themselves, you know, permission to carry on looking at what's going on up there. And I think that you have to kind of give people that kind of space, because if it's just unremitting bleakness, then people are going to get fed up with it and tune in and tune out of it, you know. So you have to, I think, if you're showing a world of darkness, you have to show some kind of sort of light and humor in that world as well. And it's also, I mean, it's like, I think that, again, we're talking about, you know, being a prisoner of where you come from as a writer. And I think that very much, this is a Scottish kind of cultural thing. It's the humour is just very, very dark, you know, and it's very, very, it's just in a really kind of quite kind of confrontational way, you know. I remember just a few weeks back when I was over in Scotland, I was at a funeral, and one of my cousin was there, and he was talking to all these this, you know, bunch of older people who had just buried a close friend, and they were very upset. And he went up to them and he said, "Look, you guys might as well just stay here. It's hardly worth your while going home." And but in a very kind of straight, you know, and I thought, you bastard, that's a fucking terrible thing to say. But they were like kind of, and then they were kind of sort of laughing about it as well, you know, because they were, you know, they were old people and they were facing up to mortality in a really way that was kind of straight in their face and all that. But this is just so much part of the culture, and I think it's part of a lot of cultures. It's not unique to Scotland, but it seems to be very, very prevalent there.
Falando sobre coisas que estão em todas as culturas, eu venho de uma cidade no sul do Brasil que na minha opinião, eram os piores taxistas do mundo. Assim, são pessoas realmente horríveis. E conversando com outras pessoas de outras cidades do Brasil, me dei conta que todo mundo acha os taxistas da sua cidade os piores taxistas. Eu estava lendo no seu penúltimo livro, A Decent Ride, que tem o Terry Lawson, que é o personagem que vem desde o Glue. E nesse livro ele é taxista. Ele é também um taxista, uma pessoa horrenda. Os taxistas de Edimburgo são realmente horrendos. Assim, qual é o problema com taxistas, afinal?
They're much worse than that in real life, actually. I kind of had an experience with a taxi driver in Edinburgh recently. Just a few weeks back, I was at the football game. My team won the Scottish Cup for the first time since 1902, and it was like incredible scenes, kind of sort of. And I had to go to Ibiza, fly out to Ibiza the next day. And they sent a car to pick me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And of course I'm out with everybody. We're all kind of jumping around and partying. It's kind of crazy. And the taxi driver picked me up. And he said, do you mind if we, you know, he got a phone call and he said, my daughter is out with this kind of head case guy. Do you mind if we go and pick her up and take her home? She wants to go home. She's been at the game all day and all that. She's very drunk. So I said, fair enough, we've got plenty of time. We're driving down to Newcastle Airport to get the flight to Ibiza. So I said, okay, let's do it. So we went back into town, and we saw his daughter at the foot of Leith Walk. She was with this guy. And he gets out to try and get the daughter into the car. And by this time, she's only about 15. She's kind of really drunk, kind of. And I got out, and I saw the guy she was with, who was maybe about 20. And he's got the Indian ink tear in his eye, and he's got the Hibs Indian ink tattoo across his hand. They've been at the game, and he's very drunk. She's very drunk. He tries to get her in, and of course, the young guy just thinks he's never met the father before, so he just thinks a pervert taxi driver is trying to grab my girl off the streets, as you would do in Edinburgh. Like, you know. So I managed to kind of calm them down. We got the girl back in. She wouldn't go by this time, and took her up. We took her up the stairs into the house. I gave her my hand, carrying her up, put her on the couch, locked her in. Then I suddenly realised I had to ask the guy, "Are you sure you're her father?" I wanted to make sure that I thought this. My party was spilling into this dystopian hell. So I thought I'm going to end up in prison for aiding a pervert taxi driver to take away this young girl from her psycho boyfriend. But he showed me all those pictures and all that, and he's saying his wife had ran out and left him, and so I got driven down from Edinburgh to Newcastle with this taxi driver, crying his eyes out. I don't know what I'm going to do with this girl. She's going to end up dead or in prison, and then he suddenly goes, "But we won the cup!" pushing the horn, punching the horn. So I had that kind of up and down thing all the way down to Newcastle on the flight to Ibiza.
Só me recuperar pouquinho aqui. Bill, tema recorrente no seu romance me parece ser a culpa. Assim. Todos os personagens, em maior ou menor grau, eles manifestam esse sentimento. Tem um sujeito que se sente culpado por ter sido mau pai, a mulher que se culpa por ter sobrevivido quando a família morreu. Todo mundo sente esse peso de uma responsabilidade por alguma coisa ruim, por mais incidental que tenha sido sua participação naquilo. Há quem diga que todo relato de si parte de um sentimento de culpa, de um desconforto por sentir alguma culpa. Aí, nesse caso, toda a narrativa pessoal seria uma justificação, uma explicação, talvez até uma forma de buscar reparação. Você acha que isso também vale para a sua literatura, para a literatura em geral?
I think in the case of the book, because there's this explosion and people sort of all of a sudden die unexpectedly, all these relationships are kind of frozen. And I think in the course of my adulthood, when I got sober and in my recovery after, I had a fair bit of amends to make, and there was a lot of wreckage to address. And I think as time went on, I realized how lucky I was that many of the people who I was able to do that with were still alive. A couple of them, like my first boss, who I used to steal from like crazy, I ended up showing up at his doorstep one day with like thousands of dollars and sitting down, and we spent the day, and I always suspected that he knew, and he had no idea. And it was a great day, it was really an amazing day, and I was good, that's why, all too good. And then he died of cancer, 6 months ago. And I went to the funeral, and I spent time with his family, and just that kind of completion of a relationship. And this was somebody who trusted me when I was 14 years old, one of the first adults to ever trust me. So that meant something. So in the book, there's all these people who don't have that chance, and so and particularly that sort of the parents and children kind of relationship. For a long time, I think I blamed my dad for sort of every single thing that had gone wrong in my life, and at a certain point, I recognized that he was just kind of an adult guy who had a crappy growing up, and he did the best he could. And in the last 11 years of his life, we were good friends. And in the book, there's a lot of those relationships between mother and daughter. Just don't have a chance to ever reach that kind of peace. And so these parents are kind of left, with this incomplete experience. And so that's it's sort of a way to explore kind of how important those relationships are. And each one of them does kind of carry that guilt. But I'm sure it comes a lot from my own experience. It's like Irvine said, you can be writing about tribes in Africa, and you're actually writing about your backyard. And so I thought I was writing about a lot of people who had nothing to do with me, and in the end, the more and more I talk about it and look at it, I realize it's a lot of my experiences.
Bem, chegaram umas perguntas aqui, então as duas são sobre o mesmo tema, então vamos. Irvine, teus livros já foram, vários dos teus livros foram adaptados para o cinema, né? Começando pelo Trainspotting, a adaptação de 96 do Danny Boyle, que acabou se tornando, ajudando, junto com o livro, a se tornar um marco cultural, um marco muito forte dos anos 90. Eu queria saber, assim, como foi a tua participação nesse filme e no... Tem o filme do Acid House, tem o Filth, que foi feito também há uns anos atrás, e agora estão finalmente fazendo o Danny Boyle está terminando com a continuação do Trainspotting, né, Trainspotting 2, que ele é baseado no porno, que é a tua continuação, ou ele é um livro, ou é um filme diferente? Assim?
Yeah, it's based. Trainspotting 2 is based on Porno, the kind of novel I wrote in I think in 2002 or something like that. But much more loosely than the first Trainspotting was based on the Trainspotting book. Basically, because we've had it around for a long time. You know, it's John Hodge, the screenwriter, has done a lot of different scripts, and it's evolved a lot. We wanted to make it contemporary, so we've kind of used porno as a basis, but we've played a bit more kind of fast and loose with it. But yeah, I mean, that's funny. It's like it's all the same people, so it's like an old school reunion. You know, it's the same director, producer, screenwriter, all the same actors. All the same crew, because you know when you film in Scotland, it's just you usually use all the same crew basically. So it's great. I think even the T-Boy is the same. Who you know the T-Boy never made it. We had high hopes for him, but he never made it big. I think maybe he's the head of Universal Studios now. He just comes back to help out because he likes us so much. But yeah, no, it's great. It's still it's actually shooting now. We're about. I think we're kind of. We're about maybe 40 days, maybe not quite, maybe about 38 days into a 52 day shoot, a 52-day shoot. So, yeah, so we're progressing and it's all looking good.
Chegou uma pergunta aqui também. Como você acha que os personagens do Trainspotting reagiriam ao Brexit?
Oh, I mean, I think it depends on the if you're talking about them in the, you know, when they were kind of in Trainspotting, when they were kind of battling all their addictions, I don't think they would care at all. It would mean absolutely nothing to them whatsoever. They would have bigger fish to fry, really. Now it's difficult to say. I mean, you know, you kind of it becomes a bit of a, you know. It's almost like when you start thinking about that, a question like that, as it would be now, you might as well just start writing, basically, you know. So I don't know would be the easiest answer.
Ok. Irvine, você mora nos Estados Unidos agora, né? Que inclusive o seu livro está sendo lançado agora pela Rocco, se passa nos Estados Unidos, esse que você leu um trecho. Os Estados Unidos é um país sui generis, não existe país como os Estados Unidos e ao mesmo tempo, atualmente, é um modelo seguido ou a contragosto ou por gosto por vários países do mundo. Assim. Morando lá, você mantém... Como você enxerga os Estados Unidos com a...
Whoa. I think, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can only give my... I'm still very much an outsider, you know. I've lived there 6 years, and so I can only kind of give. This is very, very impressionistic, but I think that there's, you know, it's like I think the thing that really struck me about America was that there's a kind of a very enforced kind of homogenous sort of view of it, you know, that everybody. You know, everybody's kind of should be, you know, everybody's kind of should be culturally the same. And then you go across there, and it's like they're almost trying to force an abstract Americanism on a sort of a bunch of different cultures and a bunch of different attitudes, and you know, and that to me seems to be the thing that struck me about it. It's a very, very diverse place and very diverse people, but it kind of wants to, instead of just kind of celebrating that kind of diversity, it kind of wants everybody to be singing from this kind of same song sheet all the time. You know, and it's constantly social engineering and nation building from the politicians and the political classes down to everybody else. But I don't know. I mean, but you're American, Bill. What do you think of it all?
Seria a minha próxima pergunta.
It's impossible. I mean, it's kind of like saying, you know, what's Britain like, you know, and you know, Wales is different than London, is different than Ireland, from Scotland, from even parts of London are completely different. But you have, you know, the deep south, and you compare that to New York, and it's two different countries completely.
Yeah.
So, which is why during, you know, sort of an election season, you know, it can be so frustrating, you know, to see some people honestly can't understand why Donald Trump has the support he does, and yet if they drove out into, you know, the deep south or the middle west and spent a little time, they'd actually begin to understand that a little bit. But it's just so vast, so it's impossible to generalize.
Chegou uma pergunta para o Bill aqui. Como um agente literário pode se manter independente no mercado de livros tão concentrado? Você tem conselhos a dar a agentes e escritores do Brasil?
Well, I quit my job 2 years ago to start a company, so we are very independent. You know, I think you just set your expectations low, and in terms of money, because if you really want to make money, go into banking or something like that, and then just and follow what you love. You know, I end up talking about a book that I represent for. You know, we share the same editor in England, and he's still talking about Trainspotting like 25 years later. And so if you don't love it, then you're fucked, because you have to speak about this and be part of its like ongoing story, because books become relevant later, long past the point of their publication, hopefully. So, you know, the only advice I would give is like try not to overthink it. You know, just go with what you respond to the most powerfully and lean into that hard.
Bill, logo no início do seu romance, o narrador se referindo à personagem June, que acabou de perder tudo num acontecimento trágico, ele diz: é mais seguro fazer as perguntas para as quais não se tem resposta. E isso é uma das definições possíveis de literatura, né? É uma atividade que ela oferece perguntas sem necessariamente buscar respostas, como, sei lá, a filosofia, a sociologia. Para você, essa característica da literatura como um apanhado de perguntas sem resposta tornaria ela um terreno seguro, como é dito em relação a June, ou as perguntas também podem ser perigosas?
I think, you know, when you embark on writing fiction, the whole thing is a question that you're in the engagement of answering on some level. Like something drew you to that subject, to that character, or to that place. In my case, it was really about the town. And so it becomes then, you know, one question becomes 100 questions, and you answer some, and mostly you don't. I mean, it's really, the question gets you into the story. And, you know, what is it like to lose everybody who matters to you? You know, I don't know the answer to that question, you know, but that's what the essential question at the beginning of the book was. But occupying the possibilities, you know, through the characters, from a variety of different characters, I think just brings you closer to other questions and the edge of other answers. So I know that sounds a little evasive, but it's true, because oftentimes the original questions that you're asking at the beginning of a book, you know, are not forgotten, but you've moved on to other territory.
Irvine, no seu último livro, que saiu esse ano, A Blade Artist, eu comecei a ler ele semana passada, e ele traz de volta o Bagby, o Francis Bagby, o personagem do Trainspotting, do Skag Boys e do Porno, que é um personagem totalmente fora de controle, violento. E nesse livro ele virou artista plástico, ele é escultor. E ele está tentando, ele tem essa violência por dentro ainda, mas ele está tentando controlar, racionalizar isso de algum modo. Durante essa leitura, eu me lembrei na hora de um outro clássico, de outro autor escocês, que é O Médico e o Monstro, do Robert Louis Stevenson. E isso me fez pensar que na identidade nacional escocesa mesmo, que tem um pouco essa divisão entre faz parte do Reino Unido, não faz parte do Reino Unido. Então, não sei, faz sentido para você essa leitura? Você enxerga a identidade nacional escocesa como uma coisa dividida?
Yeah, I mean, I think, everything really is divided. I mean, the concept of duality has always been a big theme in literature. It's really a big theme in Scottish literature as well. I mean, you mentioned Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, other, Confessions of a Justified Sinner, James Hogg and all, they've all got that kind of, that sort of element of duality in them. It's like, it does become a kind of very much a part of it. It's very much a part of the city that I grew up in. It's like Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde is based on the story of Deacon Brodie, who was an Edinburgh councillor, who was kind of very respectable guy by day and sort of real kind of murdering, kind of philandering, kind of villain by night. And it's like, I think, it's a ubiquitous theme, it's, I think, again, being part of that environment and growing up in that environment was very inspirational and quite formative to me in terms of the way I see literature.
Bem, alguém tem mais alguma pergunta? Porque a gente está chegando ao fim e é a última chance. Depois da mesa também os autores vão estar autografando aqui ao lado, né, os seus livros lançados agora. Me perdi aqui. Bill, já a partir do título, no seu último livro, no seu romance, quer dizer, você já teve uma família. Fica claro que esse é um dos temas do romance, né? Mas não me parece que você está falando só da família tradicional, nuclear, com laços de sangue, mas sim de um conceito mais amplo de família e de novas configurações. Em última análise, me parece que o livro demonstra que uma família, no sentido de um lar, um abrigo, ele pode ser encontrado em lugares inesperados, nas nossas conexões com os outros mesmo, em laços de afinidade. Eu queria que você falasse um pouco sobre isso, se essa leitura faz sentido.
Well, the title came from an Alistair Pirro poem. It was actually one line in a poem called Song and Dance. And years ago, a client named Haven Kimmel had a novel, and she used that line as her epigraph. And when she sent it in, I was like, this is your title. And the title of her book was Something Rising, which was fine. And she completely disagreed with me, and I argued quite hard for it. And thank God she won, and I lost. And over the years, actually, I tried to give that title to other novels. Oftentimes, we'll have a great novel, and there won't be a title, and we're sort of slammed for the schedule for publication. Because to me, somehow, that title could be the title of so many books. It always struck me as it's like The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. It's like that could be the title of so many novels. But so I guess the reason why, and it's not really that there isn't a question mark in the title, because to me it actually is more of an answer. It's sort of like, a sort of an explanation for a certain kind of fatigue and weariness that only a family can provoke. But the other side of it is that in so many ways, I think we, like for me anyway, and many people I know, we have to kind of like find other families away from the ones that we grew up in, sort of chosen families that we sort of gain strength in, enough to kind of to return and take a place in the family that we came from. Or not. Sometimes we just find families outside the ones we were born into because those people are animals and you shouldn't be near them. But so the idea of finding family outside of the one that we come from. It was key to me in the story here. So.
Bem, muito obrigado. Queria agradecer ao Irvine Welsh e ao Bill Clegg e a vocês e aos tradutores. Muito obrigado.